The place to be is living free in Tennessee.
Welcome to Living Free in Tennessee, where we talk about building the life you choose on your terms. Today is Monday, September 18th, 2023, and this is episode 794 of Living Free in Tennessee. And I have moved our time on Mondays from 4 o'clock to 3 o'clock because I sing in a choir and we have rehearsal at night. And I have rehearsal tonight. And last week when I tried to do this, guess what happened? It was like a total race to get to choir. So I thought, well, give an extra hour to produce the show from the audio podcast standpoint, stream it live at 3 every Monday until choir season's over, and then we'll go back to 4 o'clock or whatever, because I know you guys like that 4 o'clock time slot. So what are we going to talk about today? I'm going to share something I have shared on this podcast before, but it was a very, very long time ago. And it's about how I built a rental business when I was only earning $20,000 a year. In fact, I was earning $20,000 a year when I first started down the road of wanting to have rentals. It was just, I think I was at about $25,000 a year when I got my first one. If you guys have questions along the way or things you want me to talk about related to the rental industry or business or to this show, and you're on the live stream, put your first couple of words in all caps so that I can star that and build them into the show. I want to make sure to answer your questions along the way because I know a lot of you have thought about this as a rental stream or an income stream. And if you're listening to this show on the audio podcast and wonder, how do I get my questions in or my feedback, just email them to me, Nicole@livingfreeintennessee.com, or go to livingfreeintennessee.com, click on contact, and those will come to you. Anyway, so we'll talk about that. I'm also going to do my usual Monday segments. And I have a request. For those of you on the live stream, my lips are a different color than my lips usually are on this show. And here's why. I bought this tube of Maybelline Broadway Bronze lipstick number 315 like 3 years ago. And I bought it because this color very closely matches the color my lips actually are. I just bought a new color because I tried to buy this color and they no longer make it. So I could use some crowdsourcing help in finding me get the Maybelline Broadway Bronze 315 lip color, whether it's in another brand or, a tube of this. I have found them for $39 one place. I'm hoping to get a variety of places and maybe get it for a little less than that. I like this color because it matches my actual lip color. And so it looks a little bit more natural. I tried to get the one they recommend I get instead. I put that on today and you can see this is not my natural lip color. I look like I'm wearing lipstick and I'm uncomfortable and I feel like a clown. So please help me solve this issue so I don't have to feel like a clown for the rest of my life with the wrong lip color. Anyway, okay. Our featured event of today's show is the Self-Reliance Festival, and that's in Camden, Tennessee, October 14th and 15th. Camden, Tennessee, October 14th and 15th. And if you would like to go, get your tickets now, selfreliancefestival.com. And if you want to consider a VIP pass, you can upgrade to that. I've had 2 upgrades since we talked about it last Friday. If you've already bought your ticket, the VIP pass gives you access to a t-shirt, a Self-Reliance Festival t-shirt, not an SOE t-shirt, although this is an SOE t-shirt I'm wearing today. It says, "Don't start no shit, won't be no shit." That's kind of how I was feeling when I got up this morning. So it perfectly matched. Hello, tag from Life Done Free. Hello, Michael. Hello. I have to say this. Kiriaki Karalis says, "The lipstick matches your SOE t-shirt." I was like, yeah, I planned it that way. Anyway, and somebody else says I don't look like a clown. It's not that I look like a clown. It's that I don't usually wear lipstick this color. So I kind of feel like a clown unless I'm singing rock and roll, in which case I wear lipstick this color. So it's just, it's a weird thing I have that, other women don't have probably, but I didn't wear makeup until a few years ago for most of my adult life. So unless I was on stage. So anyway, Self-Reliance Festival is our featured event of the day. If you'd like a VIP upgrade, just send me an email and we can invoice you for the difference between that. You get a t-shirt, you get digital recordings, you get a VIP parking pass, and you get access to the VIP lounge, all of which helps us with the festival costs. You also get to be at the dinner, and we're going to have some fantastic food this time. Anyway, also want to talk about our sponsors of today's show. Sponsor number one is Permies.com. Paul Wheaton is launching another Kickstarter. That's right, another Kickstarter, and it has not launched yet. It launches tomorrow at 2 p.m. But here's what Paul does. He always has like a bundle you can get for just $1 of a whole bunch of really cool stuff. Now, the Kickstarter is to finance the making of a second video in their series of videos they've been working on this year. So it's going to focus on, I believe it's rocket mass things, but you have all sorts of cool stuff you get if you're an early bird supporter. And here's the reason they do this, guys. They do this because if you have a whole bunch of people give you support in the beginning of your Kickstarter, the first couple of days, it helps increase the visibility of your Kickstarter just on the Kickstarter.com platform. So it launches tomorrow at 2. I've put a link in the show notes or in the comments for how you can sign up to get an email informing you that it's launched. And it just says inform me, and you click the button. And if you don't have a Kickstarter account, you get to set one up at that time. But here are some of the cool things that you can get after it launches. It'll be Bo Davidson basically was working on at the Permaculture Jamboree myco insulation. So basically he's using mushrooms to make insulation, and he's got a video on that. So his webinar on how to do that, which I think is really cool, especially since I've just bought insulation at the store and it was super expensive. Margot says, I love buying his Kickstarters. You get so much useful information. Yeah. They also have How to Use Leftover Way by Kate Downham, which is a digital download. It's an ebook. Remodel Green, Make Your House Serve Your Life by Kelly Hart, a green home building book. An edition of Living Woods magazine, issue 5, Natural Bath Bombs, Cottage Style Rocket Heater, Sauna edition. That's kind of cool. You've got a Tiny House issue 127. So it's just a bunch of stuff. So what'll happen is tomorrow at 2, if you follow this link, click on it and say, email me. Tomorrow at about 2 p.m. when they launch, an email will go out saying, hey, we're live. Come support us. And then if you click on that link within the first 3 days, and choose the $1 support level, it's only $1, you'll get all of this cool stuff for free. So I just wanted to make sure you knew that was going on. Our second sponsor of today's show is John Pugliano of the Wealth Studying Podcast. John Pugliano has put together a great podcast just about how he analyzes investments, what he's investing in, how geopolitical things are stacking up, and how that impacts his decision making. And he puts all of that in a really cool podcast called the Wealth Studying Podcast. Go to investablewealth.com to check that out. And he's been a great supporter of the show. I put him on as today's sponsor because we're talking about real estate investment today. And I thought, well, who better to pair with this topic than John Pugliano of the Wealth Studying Podcast? Check that out at investablewealth.com. With that, we're going to go into today's show. Our first segment is the live stream schedule. I know it feels like, it kind of feels like on Monday to me. It's like announcements, like summer camp. So as I said, Monday show has moved to 3 p.m. from 4 p.m. We will be doing that every Monday that I'm in town. Tuesday, 12:30 live with John Willis and Pat Watson from Uncensored Tactical. He is our lockpicking guy who's speaking at the Self-Reliance Festival. And that will be tomorrow at 12:30. Friday at 10:30 a.m. I will be doing a live stream about homestead happenings. And we will be talking a lot about baby sheep because we had baby sheep over the weekend. So also known as lambs. I think they're known as lambs when they're babies like that, right? Anyway, that's, we'll have fun stories about that. It's always great to have babies on the homestead. So, it's going to be a fun homestead happenings edition this Friday. Now, I get to actually talk about something that's substantive, and that is Tales from the Prepper Pantry, where we talk about storing what you use and using what you store. And I love having a pantry. I love having a deep pantry. I don't think I ever would have developed the skills for a deep pantry had I not moved out to the country, where the quickest store to get to is 25 minutes from here. And I did actually go to the store for one item this weekend due to poor planning, and it was the glasses that I am holding up in the live stream right now because I broke my reading glasses. I order these by the box of 10 because I break them, I lose them, and they wear out. And I ordered a box of 10 about a year ago. And yesterday, when I was up in the pasture, I pulled my glasses, like I was carrying them on my head like this. So I pulled my glasses down, and there was only one lens, and the other side was cracked. And I think it was like we were going back and forth to check out the babies a lot. And I was working on my roaster yesterday, and I was like, oh, that's okay. I still have one pair of glasses left. And I've known for like a month I really should order another box of 10, but I was sort of trying to decide what level I wanted, if it was 1.25 or 1.5. The answer is 1.5. And I came home and couldn't find them. And so finally I finished roasting because I'm farsighted. I can see far away, but if like you wanted me to read this without glasses on, not happening. And so I literally I could kind of see my phone when people texted me yesterday, and I couldn't see my answers if they had typos. And so I was just like, whatever, I'll just be filled with typos. And I was able to roast the coffee, but I couldn't actually stuff the coffee into the shipping bags and ship them because I could not read the packing slips, right? That's how bad it was. So I actually drove that 25 minutes to the store just to spend $6 on this pair of glasses, which is high because when you buy them by the 10 pack, they're not $6 each. They're a lot cheaper. So anyway, I wasted money. I failed myself in the pantry because I did not listen to myself on resupply. You can avoid that by having the pantry practice of having your long-term storage and then your short-term storage and then your things you're actually using. And when you go from long-term storage to short-term storage, you replace the item that went from long-term to short-term. It's all part of the power pantry planning method that I usually use, except for my glasses this year. Anyway, I'll be ordering glasses by tomorrow. Part of why I don't keep more than 10 pair of reading glasses on hand is that if I have too many pair of these and then the level of focus I need changes, then it's just wasteful. So I usually just buy them by the 10 pack. And when I get down to a couple of pairs, I buy another 10 pack after deciding if my eyes have changed or not. But as I said, that totally failed me this year. Okay. So I really need to kick up cheese production. I am actually speaking at a MAG meeting at Bradley Bleasdale's, which he put out on our Telegram group. And, I asked him, do you want me to, cross promote the heck out of this and get a bunch of people out to your place? He's like, not really unless they live close to me, which is Spencer, Tennessee. So if you're near Spencer, Tennessee, let me know and I'll hook you up with Brad so you know the when and where and all of that. Jenny says, what? Nicole loses her glasses? Giggle, giggle. Yeah, Nicole loses her glasses. And then I find them again, like in the garden in different places. It's really hilarious. It's why I don't buy expensive glasses. But he also is the producer of raw milk that I buy. So I have a herd share in his herd and I get milk there. And usually what I do is I get like a half a gallon a week and I use it. And then every so often I send a text saying, hey, can I have 6 gallons or 3 gallons or whatever? And I make cheese. Well, with my schedule this year, I've only done that a few times. And my one cheddar cheese that I did, it worked out fine, except for I was out of town when it was developing the rind, which is you harden off the outer part of your wheel of cheese so that it protects it from getting moldy. And then you wax it or you seal it in a vacuum sealed bag. And I forgot to tell Tactical that every day he needed to flip this thing over. So I came home to a cheese pyramid because it hadn't been flipped the whole time. And what happened is it like dried on top but not bottom. And then I flipped it over and I did that for another couple of days. And you salt it so it doesn't mold. Well, it got a little bit of mold on it. So instead of going into a wax ball or a vacuum sealed pack, what I decided to do is just eat it right away. So we have basically fresh cheddar cheese that's not aged, which is kind of what American cheese tastes like. And I just cut off the outer rind that had mold on it, because you can do that as long as it doesn't penetrate into the cheese. And is, that's anybody who's done that, or anybody who grew up in the 80s knows that trick. So just eating that up, but that means I have no cheddar put aside for the summer. So I'm hoping to find some windows where I can make cheese before the end of the year. We'll see. I looked at my travel schedule for the year, and I'm basically not home until November 20th, and then I'm home. So it's all of my own making, but I am finishing up some agreements I agreed to earlier this year when I was not being cognizant of my schedule. And next year, I'm not going to book myself this way. But unfortunately, this year, I did book myself this way. I also have so much food. It's crazy how much food we have here. And it's because we're growing a lot on the homestead. And I sort of kicked it up this year a notch. So getting a ton of food off the garden right now, and I've just got I've got to the point where I can't put it in my fridge, and I haven't preserved it the way I usually do. I'm trying to use the food fresh as much as possible. And we're kind of about to fall off the cliff, and I won't have so much food fresh from the garden. So right now I'm really enjoying it. And this weekend I went out there and found a couple more cucumbers, which was awesome because my vines have been dying back, and I've just been letting them die back. And I went out to the lettuce patch and checked that out. It's time to thin the lettuce. Just had a pretty good garden harvest. And we'll see. I may actually blanch and freeze some of this stuff, but I'm also sort of thinking which plants do I want to transplant into pots right now and bring into the house to overwinter. So we'll look at that, because my Malabar spinach this year did so good. It's never done this well. Malabar spinach, for the record, really likes rabbit poop. Malabar spinach is a vine that does well in hot weather, and its leaves taste like spinach. So it's sort of a way that you can have spinach, in air quotes, because it's not really a spinach, in your food in the summer in Tennessee without growing it inside. And I'm kind of toying with the idea of rooting one of the vines, because it also roots really it's like a sweet potato. You get it, you can root it. And I've been toying with rooting it and bringing it in the house and seeing if I can set up one area somewhere where there's some lights, and I just see if I overwinter that, and overwinter a pepper, and I have a tomato I've overwintered once already. And just, I have a sweet potato that started putting slips on, and it's way too late to put sweet potatoes out and get sweet potatoes, but maybe I could have a sweet potato plant. And then I have infinity spinach, which is another hot weather hardy spinach that Jack Spirko gave to me last May. And it was really slow going until about a month ago, and then it exploded everywhere. And as long as again, it's another one that doesn't like to get cold, but you can just basically take your fingers and pinch the top off and put that in soil, and you end up with a second plant. It's also super healthy. It's another spinach sort of knockoff plant. So I'm going to be bringing that in. So that's a lot of where my pantry thoughts are what can I bring in over the winter? What can I produce over the winter fresh? And then do I have things covered that I want to have over the winter by things I've preserved or other ways, just going into this time of year? Because what's about to happen next is I'm going to do my one fall restock trip. And what I have is the Cozy app on my phone, which is where I write down when I take things out of long-term storage and into short-term storage. And that list will then yield what I restock in the fall. And I'll decide if I'm just going to go to Sam's Club or whatever, or if I'm just going to order it to be delivered. Sometimes I like to just order it in, and it costs more, but then it doesn't cost time, and that's likely to happen this fall. Other times I want to go to the store and pick things out. I need a brush to clean my fingernails because mine wore out in my bathroom. And I'm only finding tiny little ones that are 2 inches long and a 1/2 inch. They're like tiny. And I want like the good old fashioned one grandpa had by his sink. So I need to go to the store to find that because I have not found it online. I just find these tiny ones. Things like that I'll go to the store for. And it's like, and I have a, like, that's what I call like my random weird sundries list. That's on the random weird Sunday list. The Power Pantry webinar is going to be posted for sale. Somebody asked me how you buy it, and I realized that I never did release that recording for sale. So I'm going to put it on Podia. I'm actually thinking of packaging it with just sort of a set of things. So that'll be coming out before the end of the month. And I know that sounds like I just say I'm going to do something else, and I just told you how busy I am, but it's already recorded. It's already edited. It's ready to go. I am also going to redo that live webinar probably after the turn of the year. Like I thought I would do it this fall, but I looked at my schedule and I got real, and I'm going to do it after into next year. And the reason I wanted to re-record it is I want to add a section on how to build up your pantry when you're really kind of living close to the line, and how to then leverage your pantry to help with your budget. And when I recorded the Power Pantry webinar, I had COVID, which is not a problem in and of itself because it's not like you could catch it from me over the internet. But I had a couple of times in the webinar where I was having coughing fits. I was having trouble with my voice. And I would like to re-record it with this voice instead of the cold voice that I had, because that just, I have a hard time listening to somebody sounding like that personally. So I thought, well, I'll redo that one, and we'll do some updates in it, and people will probably come to the live webinar next year. Then this weekend was supposed to be about removing. I have an extra shelf in my pantry right now that I put in there for my spring workshop, and I was sort of deciding if I wanted to leave it there, and I decided no, I don't, because you have to kind of go down these narrow aisles. And one of my rules about making your pantry workable, if you can, is make it so you can access things. Because if you make it so it's hard to get to stuff, then you don't get to stuff, and then you just go buy one at the store because that's easier than walking down the narrow little aisle or move the thing to get to the thing. And then you end up with something in your pantry that's 9,000 years old that should not be 9,000 years old. And so what I was supposed to do was get that rack, which is on casters, unloaded because it had all this spring workshop stuff on it, and then moved to the base camp basement, and then the stuff put on it that have to do with the workshop, so that I have easier access to the shelves in my pantry again. And then what happened last Sunday is I was roasting and my roaster broke. And it had already been like behaving a little weird. And I had already ordered the parts I thought I needed to fix the behaving weird, which was that it wasn't heating up the coffee as quickly as I wanted it to. And on Sunday, on my last roast of the day, it just did not get up the temperature. It just stopped. Now it's still heated, but it wouldn't take the temperature up above 400 degrees, which is not enough to finish roasting coffee. So I ruined 15 pounds of coffee. I actually did it twice because I tried it again. And then I texted the guy I bought the roaster from, and I said, do you have elements in yet? Because I knew he was ordering them, and I told him I needed 5 just because I wanted to replace all the elements going into Christmas roasting season. And I said, because I think I'm dead in the water right now. My other roaster's broken too. In fact, I'm selling that. It's not really broken. It needs a part that I don't want to spend $250 on because I'm just going to sell it. And that's my little Sono Fresco. It's a 2-pound roaster that works off of propane. And it's what I started when I got serious about hollow roast coffee. That was my first commercial roaster. And I have moved on from that to roasting more coffee at a time. But I sort of always kept that one as a backup. And I decided when I dropped and shattered the roasting chamber, which is $250 to replace, that I didn't want to repair it because I don't really use it. And I should sell it to somebody else who's starting a roasting business because it works perfectly well with a roasting chamber. But it's just, I've outgrown it. And that just meant that my pathetic backup system was not there. So it's a problem of my own making. Anyway, Saturday all day, we were working on and off roaster repair, and then we had the sheep born. So, you have to go play with baby sheep if you have sheep on your homestead. That's just what you do. And then Sunday I got up and I'm like, okay, I'm really going to roast coffee today because I've been out for a week. So I have a week's worth of roasting to do, which is a lot of roasting. And I got in and I was like, oh, wait, there's some other things that need to be done to the roaster before it can really work. And so spent another half the day working on the roaster. And this means that none of the pantry projects I thought I was going to do this weekend got done. In fact, a lot of things didn't get done this weekend, but the roaster's back up and running and I got all the coffee roasted before I went and bought glasses yesterday. And then this morning I put the orders into the shipping boxes and shipped it. And the funniest part was like one variety of coffee, because I couldn't read. I get this roasting sheet off of hollowroast.com. It's like you need, 11 pounds of this roast of that coffee whole bean, and you need 12 pounds of that roast ground drip or whatever. It gives me a matrix. I call it the roasting matrix. It's a roasting schedule. And unfortunately, at 12-point font, if I don't have glasses on, I can't actually read numbers. So I was sort of like holding the sheet out far away, hoping I guessed the number right for roasting. And turned out I hadn't guessed one of the numbers right. So I ended up roasting a little bit more today. But that really impacted what I did in the pantry. Next up, we have the weekly shopping report from Joe. Joe says, I gassed up on Friday and spent the usual $3.89 per gallon of untainted regular. Untainted regular means no ethanol. Whenever I can get no ethanol, I do, because I get better gas mileage without the ethanol. Traffic was moderate. Weather was nice. All of the drink coolers were working at the Dollar Tree. I bet he's happy about that because one of them's been broken for a long time. And they were well stocked. The health aisle looks pretty full too, with a good supply of generic over-the-counter medicines. A 2x4x8 remains $3.68 at the Home Depot. I'm not sure if I saw any AA or AAA lithium batteries, but they have plenty of the alkaline. And they do have lithium coin cells and CR123s. The store was normal busy. Aldi was last, and we found what we wanted. They even had a little bit of the 70% cacao in stock. Staple prices were milk, $2.82 a gallon, eggs, $1.03 a dozen, heavy cream, $4.69 for a quart, butter, $3.19 for a pound, orange juice, $3.19, bacon, $3.99, potatoes, $5.99, sugar, $3.09, and flour, $2.19. Next up, we have the Frugality Tip, and this one comes from Janet Zabo, who just launched a podcast on sewing. So you should totally check out her podcast. I did send it out in the Daily Mail today as well. Anyway, this one can help keep things tidier in your bathroom too. So if you're like me, you don't want to waste your soap, and you get down to the little sliver and it's really hard to use in the tub, and then finally you get frustrated and you leave the sliver there, and then you get another bar of soap, right? Or do you throw that sliver away? Whether you keep that sliver or throw that sliver away says a lot about you and your tidiness practices in your shower. Anyway, what you can do with it is put it in a little container to the side until you have enough of them to grind up and use them to make soft soap or liquid hand soap. So you just sort of grate it up and add water until it's the consistency you want and stir it up. And that is liquid soap. That's the secret to soft soap. So Janet uses her little slivers to double purpose, and she probably keeps a tidier soap area in her bathroom as a result. Next up, we have Operation Independence. This is where we talk about the local ongoing revenue. And this week we had three baby sheep, also known as lambs. They were born. So we've known one of our ewes was close, and the other one looked like she was getting close. And Saturday morning, when Tactical went to go check on the sheep, there was a little boy born. And he's still healthy and he's doing well. We've been keeping an eye on that one though, because he's not as hyper or vigorous as other baby sheep that we've seen. And I'm not entirely sure that the nursing is going great with his mom. So I'm just but he looks okay. So I'm just keeping an eye on that. And then we took a careful look at the other ewe that was very close to giving birth. And she, we went over there 3 or 4 times Saturday to check because it seemed like she might be in labor, but by the end of the day, there was no babies. And then Sunday morning, there were 2 little girls. So we have 3 new heartbeats on the homestead, and this is just as we get towards the time to reunite the girl sheep with the boys so that we can have spring sheep. And where we've been with this is that I had to sort of choose a time to not have ideal production to get everybody back on a similar schedule. So I'm super happy that 2 of our 3 girls had their babies within a day of each other, because that means we were successful with that. And we knew the other one wouldn't get pregnant because she had just had a baby when it was time to expose them to the males. So now I think as a result of this birth, we're going to wait 6 to 8 weeks before we put the boys back in with the girls. And then I also have, because we had all girls except for 1 this year born. So that's pretty good. And Tactical definitely wanted to get up to 6 females in the herd. And now we have 7. So we're where we want to be girls wise. And the little boy, his name is Lamb Chop because that's what we intend for him to be. But I think I'm going to wait until mid-November before we reunite everybody. And then we had 1 born. I have 3 females that are, 2 of them are just becoming old enough to be able to get pregnant. One of them can get pregnant, but she's not a year old yet. So all 3 of those, I would rather wait till they're a year old before they get pregnant for the first time so that they're in better physical condition going into that situation. And it's just better for them in general. So we're going to end up needing to move them out so the boys can come in because, sheep don't have rule books. And I want to make sure that we don't accidentally get somebody pregnant early. So that's going to happen. And I haven't really talked with Tactical about how we're making that work, but I'm kind of excited about the fact that we did. I mean, it was sort of a good year for lamb futures at the Holler Homestead. But we will run out of lamb meat before we get our next lamb meat because we had so many girls and we wanted to keep the girls that we just have this 1 boy, and that's going to be like 30 to 40 pounds of meat, probably more like 30. That's been my experience. So 30 pounds of meat goes strangely quickly when you are eating a ketogenic diet, right? Anyway, the real reason you're here, though, is to talk about how I built my real estate business with a $25,000 a year job. And I thought about this topic because I've been talking a little bit about the rentals. I haven't talked to you guys about my different income streams and how I pay for my life in a long time. But one way I pay for my life is through rental income. And the thing about the rental business is you end up really busy all at once. And then once things are sort of on an even keel, less busy. And there are ways you can structure it where you don't have to do the work that I do on my rental business. But I approached my rental business with a long-term goal of having sort of ongoing revenue in retirement, so older. And my idea was if I focus time on building it when I'm younger and have energy, then when I'm older and maybe not working full-time anymore, it's something that can help pay for my life. So it's part of my retirement strategy. And it's been something that I was first wanting to work into my life, and then so I wanted to start rental business probably by the time I was 19 or 20. And I got my first rental when I was in my late 20s. Okay, so it took a while to go from want to learn to pay for. And by the time I got my first rental, I already knew what my long-term strategy was. And so when I chose my first rental, it was with the idea that I have positive cash flow rather than with the idea I buy something at this price and then 20 years from now it's appreciated in value. And then that's when I finally make my payday. So there's different ways to organize your business, your rental business, and none of them are wrong per se. I know there are a lot of books about, getting rich quick with real estate, and I think it is possible to do those sorts of things, but I think it's harder than the books make it sound like it is. And I will say this, like I've put a lot more work in on my rentals than I ever thought I'd have to. But I feel like the payoff has been worth the time that I invest in this. And it's aggravating sometimes. I think it takes a certain mental approach to work for people. So people who don't like being interrupted on Christmas to go fix something at their rental that broke shouldn't do rentals. Unless you're able to set it up with a property manager who gets interrupted in Christmas, in which case you're paying you're getting less profit to do that, but then you're taking less of your time too. So that's just sort of a big perspective. So it was sort of in the early 2000s, I was still living in an apartment. I had a job that my first paycheck, like my first salary was $20,000 a year. And at that time, $20,000 a year was not a lot of money. It wasn't like $20,000 in the 80s, but it wasn't terrible. I could live on that. I didn't have a lot of extra every month. And in order to pay for my life, what I came to was the best way to do this is to have a roommate. And so I had roommates. I had roommates through college, and I had roommates when I got my first job. It's kind of that simple. And that's how I kept my expenses down. And when I look back on my life, I had rarely lived without roommates. I had one apartment once that was a studio apartment by myself. And when I moved to a 2-bedroom apartment with HVAC, which was totally unheard of in that time, and a decent, kitchen and all of that, I paid less with the roommate in that 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom place than I did for the studio apartment with no frills at all. So it was sort of a personal choice I made to deal with the aggravation of roommates, because it's how I made my money work. And pair that with when I was growing up, my dad was sort of trying to follow the rich dad, poor dad model, and he had rental properties. So I grew up helping my dad fix up, clean, paint, all of those things between tenants on rental properties. And I wasn't a stranger to doing those kinds of tasks. So when I was in college, I took jobs cleaning houses for people and painting places. In particular, painting was the thing I did a lot of because those kinds of jobs are pretty flexible. And over the time, I got pretty good at painting and cleaning. And I also was an excellent tenant because I knew what it looked like when somebody left and left a mess, because I had cleaned up those messes. And so I never left a mess. I always, if there was damage that I caused, that was one thing. Like that sometimes accidentally happens. Like I'm actually looking across the room at my own home where I have a mountain dulcimer hanging on the wall, and I could not find the stud. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There are 7 screw holes from me trying to hang that thing up and not finding the stud. And I have never gone back and filled those in and painted over it. That is on my list this year, like this year being 2024, not this year being this year. This whole room I'm in will get a facelift because behind me is going to be customized for the recording studio, and that means this whole room will be part of that update. Anyway, so damage like that in a rental I would fix, but if I had accidentally broken something, I just told the landlord when I did that. Like, I didn't wait till I moved out. I told them when I did it that it happened. And because of that, actually one memorable landlord, I lived in sort of the Portland area on one side of the city and then needed to move. And so I gave notice and they were like, "Oh, we're so sorry to lose you." And I'm like, blah, blah, blah. And then I found another apartment I wanted to look at. And I looked at the phone number and it was the same landlord. And I was like, "Hey, so this is funny. I just called you and gave notice. And now I'm calling you to see if I can look at another apartment across the town." And they were like, "Oh, if you like it, you can just rent it. You don't need to come up with extra deposit. We'll just transfer it over, like, no problem at all." So I knew what it was like to be an excellent tenant, which means I know what it's like to have an excellent tenant. And I always try to find that kind of person. I also, by that time, knew I eventually wanted to have rental properties. I talked to that particular landlord. Like, I interviewed her because she was my age running rentals for a living. And I was like, "How did you get that to happen?" And she said, "Well, my dad bought all of these when I was a kid, really cheap. And so he ended up, because he had so many rentals, having a property management business. And so I just sort of came up into the property management business. And then, like, these pass on to me when he dies, sort of thing." So that's how she came up into it. But I was able to ask her lots of questions. And here's what I observed in that part of my life was that all of their paint on the walls were the same colors. The carpets were all the same carpet. The appliances were all the same brand. Like, there was a standardization between these two apartments that when I thought about it, I was like, "Oh, that totally makes sense." Because you're never like, "What color paint did I put in this place?" Right? And you can update your paint from time to time, but you know, if you know what it is, that's when you can, when somebody punches a hole in the wall and you really only need to paint that one wall, you can paint that one wall and it matches the other walls and you don't end up with an unfortunate problem. And I observed that as a tenant. So at this point, I had always been interested in real estate and I'd been looking at places and they were just out of reach for me. So I did one of those things that became a habit in my life, which is I asked myself, "Well, what can I do?" And what I realized I could do is I could learn it. I could learn the trade of being a landlord. And it just so happened that I was pretty close friends with somebody who had multiple rental properties. And he was in a situation where he had quickly grown his rental business and had a full-time job. He was promoted at his job and ended up with, lots of work to do and was having a little trouble keeping up with all the property management. So he needed help. And I was a friend and I was like, "Well, I need to learn about this stuff, so I'll help you." And if I was ever doing work like painting or cleaning, he'd pay me hourly, and then we had a lot of conversations about the management side of things. And I got to go with him when he was having meetings with people or when he was showing, or help him market and advertise for tenants and that sort of thing. And I got to see up close and personal the property management part. I got to hear him taking calls when things were broken, all of that sort of thing. And what he already had in place was standardized rental agreements. He had like a standardized application process and a standardized rental agreement. And he had gotten these by joining a local landlords association, professional association, something we don't like. We have them in Tennessee, but they're not like they were in Oregon. In Oregon, it was like, "Here's all the templates, go. These are the rules." In Tennessee, it's not the same. It's, you just got to get a lawyer here. And that's something I learned by operating in multiple states now, is every state's different in the rental market. And it's important to understand that before you just go off and buy something in Ohio or Florida. Like, if you don't know the rules, you need to go learn what the rules are because they're specific to your state. So what I helped him establish in his rental business was more standardized policies and template agreements, and standardized paint colors, standardized carpets, like all of those things. Also, this is going to like tick people off who are renters, but don't provide garbage disposals, ceiling fans, or like washer dryers, because everything that's in that apartment when they move in, you are required to maintain, no matter if they are hanging off the ceiling fan and it comes out of the ceiling. As the landlord, you basically have to fix that. So it's not so much about the money you lose in that situation. It becomes a time suck when you have to always, have to switch out appliances or whatever. And so what we learned to do, like I always provide the stove, the fridge, right? Like in the kitchen. Some places don't, by the way. And I do something that he didn't do, which is I usually provide a dishwasher, because that differentiator of a dishwasher can make a big difference to people. But garbage disposals are a thing into which people throw things like spoons and knives and glass. And then in order to fix it, you either have to get that stuff out of there or you have to replace the whole thing. And unless, well, there's no unless. I slowly took garbage disposals out of anywhere that had it for that reason. They clog up because they put their potato peels down it because they think you can grind up all your potato peels on Thanksgiving, and you can't. Ask me how I know. The only time I ever had a clog at a rental, I had done that, and I paid Roto-Rooter to come out and fix it. Because what happens with potatoes when you put them down the drain like that is they get bigger. Just in case you didn't know that, that's the one reason you needed to listen to this podcast today, right? So I helped him standardize those things. I went through several bad tenants with him, like having to go through the eviction process because they weren't paying and they trashed the place, and we fixed it up from being trashed and standardized on paint colors, got the carpet redone, all of that. And what I noticed I learned a ton in that process. And one of the things I learned, and I don't know a great way to say this, so I'm just going to say it how I say it, is don't be nice. If you're going to be a landlord, you can't be nice. And you don't need to be mean, but don't be nice. Like, these are the policies. This is how they work. Oh, but these are the policies. This is how they work. That's against the policy. We're not doing that. If you can just be matter of fact and businesslike, you actually end up in a very clear relationship with your tenant. They are clear on what the policies are because you've taken time to think about them. And you set a standard of communication. And if you start out that way, it's a lot better long term than if everybody has a different arrangement with you. A, you don't have to remember that you said yes to this one and no to that one. B, you don't run amok of fairness and housing laws, which are a federal mandate. And it's amazing what can be misconstrued as you are being racist, or you're basically choosing preference over somebody just because you were nice to somebody who asked you to do an exception to one of your policies. So I just set the policies and I do them. And one of the policies I have about rent is if it's late, you will get your eviction notice immediately if you're late. And I always do that. However, if you call me and tell me you're going to be late one time a year, I won't charge you the late fee. So, if somebody's like, man, payday hits 5 days after rent is due, I know it's going to happen. I can see it coming. Could I pay late this month? The answer is yes, this month. Only one time. And I'm still going to send the eviction notice, because if I don't follow the schedule and for some reason 5 days turns into 30 days, I'm a month behind on getting that property cleared for the next tenant. So I tell them, this is going to come in the mail if it's late, because that's part of our process, but I won't charge you the late fee. And that's worked for me pretty well, just having very clear policies. I also, my friend who I was learning from came up with this idea. Here's something about leases. When you enter into a lease, let's say it's a 12-month lease as a landlord, it's very hard to get out of that lease to say, never mind, I don't want this relationship anymore until 12 months are over. If you are month to month, you only have to give 30, 60, or 90 days notice, depending on where you are. I don't know anywhere that has longer than 90 days notice, but check your state. Check the city in your state, because you have city regulations as well. And from a landlord perspective, that's easier because if you live in a place where you can give no cause notice and you notice that there is a problem with the tenant, you can just go no cause notice, and that's better than having damage on your property long term. Um, and so we kind of came to leases are not great. Like leases are cool because you're secure for a year, right? But if it's a terrible tenant, then you're stuck with a terrible tenant for a year unless you really can have, like, if they don't pay, then you have cause to get rid of them, for example. But every time you change tenants, there's a period of time. It's expensive. It costs money. And we're running this like a business, right? Like you need to get more out of it than what you're putting into it, or else you shouldn't be doing it. And we came up with this concept of a move-in fee. So I do refundable deposit. Like some landlords just do, it's a refundable deposit except for this amount, or it's a non-refundable deposit, or whatever. We came up with the refundable deposit at a certain amount and the move-in fee at another amount. And my move-in fee right now is about $250. And that's just because that's what it costs by the time you've changed the locks and you do all these things in between. No matter what you do, you're going to be doing things that you are not pulling out of the former person's deposit. The move-in fee at my place turns into a refundable deposit if you've been there for a year. So we would go month to month with the move-in fee that turns into a refundable deposit after 12 on-time payments. On-time payments. It's another piece. We're rewarding behavior we'd like to see in our tenants with that one. So that was something that he standardized on with me. With his, I used it in mine for a long time. I've actually moved to a lease term approach now, but I still have that move-in fee because sometimes they break the lease. And then we learned a lot about screening services and the quality of different screening services. And man, to the extent as a landlord that you can pre-screen your tenant and they have a history of being a good tenant, you are going to have so many fewer problems. Like the biggest thing you can do is not let somebody in who doesn't pass your screening criteria. And anybody listening to this who doesn't pass screening criteria right now is frustrated with me because they need a second chance. And I get that. Every time I've ever given a second chance to somebody over the years, it has bitten me in the butt. And so the problem here is other people have set a standard of when I make an exception to the rule and then it costs me $4,000 or $5,000 because they trashed the place or whatever. Like there's always been something, and it's usually $4,000 to $5,000 it costs me when I have made exceptions. This is why I don't make exceptions anymore to the policies. And it's unfortunate because it's harder once somebody is in a space where they are unable to pass screening services that has happened. But I can tell you, after I've been doing rentals since, well, for about 20 years. So after 20 years of doing rentals, it's like, I know why. I know why. I think the most important thing that I did when I didn't have money to buy my first rental was find mentors and to ask myself, what can I do and what can I learn and how can I help somebody else do well? And then what can I learn from that along the way? And as a result of that, one of my mentors was instrumental in helping me get my first home for me because I was just renting apartments this whole time. And what happened is he was like, why don't you have a home yet? And I'm like, well, because my salary is not so awesome. And I still haven't qualified for a home. And he was, he did that thing where he said, well, what can you qualify for? It's the same thing. Like, what can I do? Right. And so I agreed to meet with a real estate agent that he knew really well and a I call them loan sharks, like a lender, a loan shark that he knew really well, just to see like, okay, because I'd been working on building my credit for 3 years. And by building my credit, I mean, I got cards, I put stuff on them, and I took a couple months to pay that off so that I had a credit score. Because if you have no credit score, you cannot qualify for a mortgage. And if you want to play their game, that's how you play their game. You go and figure out how to build a credit history without going into horrible credit card debt, which is part of why that game is built that way. So you go into debt, so you end up a slave to the system. But we're not going down that road right now, are we? Nope, we are not. So as I was sitting there, I'm talking to the real estate agent. I qualified for $150,000 house, which at that time was, like 175 would have been really, really nice house. But at 150 in some parts of town in Portland, Oregon, you could get a house that was not terrible. And when I looked at what that meant monthly, and I looked at my $25,000 a year income, and I was like, but I can't. I mean, like, you say I can afford that, but I can't afford that. Like, it's not going to work. And so when I really analyzed it, and this was the cool thing about having a mentor at that time, is he made me look at that. I didn't just believe the loan shark that I could buy a $150,000 home. He was like, what's your monthly? What can you really afford? And I came to that I could really only afford $100,000 or so home when I looked at my finances. And again, at that time in Portland, Oregon, you could still buy a house for like $100,000. Think about that today, guys. This is something that it's hard to watch happen in our society, that has changed so much because homes are so much more expensive now. And I'm telling you how I did it on a $25,000 a year salary. And if you are on a $25,000 a year salary in 2023, you have a harder job than I had. Just throwing that out there. You have a much harder job than I have, but it's not impossible. And I think that's the thing to remember, or the thing to get out of this, is what can I do today? Like I was just with Matt Hundley, one of the organizers of the Back to the Land Festival. And when he didn't have a lot of money, he figured out how to get land. And then he basically camped on that land until he had built his first tiny home. And then he lived in a tiny home. And he kind of built everything as he went, because that's what he could do. And it was because he was so committed to his goal that he made it happen. And I've seen Justin saying, I've never made that in a year. Well, okay, so I think when Matt got his first piece of land and started building what he had, I don't think he was making that in a year either. I don't know for sure. You'd have to ask him. But again, if you don't get anything else out of this, just get the, once you decide to do a thing, it's asking yourself, what can I do to go that direction? So I started looking, and you know what, like you get a real estate agent and they're like, okay, between this amount and that amount, and they'll go a little higher than you can afford, and they'll go kind of low, and this many bedrooms in this area, and you'll get this like list of everything that's for sale. And, and then she sat down with me, and my friend was there to basically say, but what kind of house you want? Like, how are we going to narrow this down? And he was like, well, okay, I have all these rentals. You've seen all my rentals. Which one of those do you like? And I was like, well, if I could have any house in the world, I'd actually have this one of your rentals specifically. Like, I actually like that house. And he just looked at me and he's like, I don't even like managing that rental, because it was sort of out of his area. And he's like, why don't you just buy that one for me? And I was like, really? I could buy that house? And he's like, yeah. And we agreed on an amount, like right there in front of the real estate agent. And I bought that house from him. And because I knew the owner, and I'm seeing Robin says, owner financed my first rental, took a family who were in an ER situation. Big mistake, having a come to Jesus with current tenants over grass. Jacking rent $100 to pay someone to cut it in 2024. Yep. Yeah. See, you can make mistakes, and Robin's made a mistake. Now she owner financed her first one. Guys, I basically owner financed my first house because I knew the owner and I was able to buy it from him. So then I no longer needed the loan shark, right? Wrong. Here's how that went down. I owner financed it originally with an agreement to pay him off within 2 years. And then once my name was on the deed, I was paying him. Once my name was on the deed, any equity I built in that house over the next 2 years went towards a refinance, and it is easier to refinance than to initially finance, right? So I refinanced it and, paid him for the whole house, basically. And I had a house, and it was great. And when I took over that house, it had renters in it. So I was still in an apartment, and there were renters in the house. And I worked with them for a bit, and then they didn't like me, so they moved out. And so I moved in. And you know what I did immediately in a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom home? Guess what I did? I got roommates immediately. So when I first bought the house, owner financed, rent was paying for the mortgage plus a little bit, and I was just, putting it aside. And then I moved in and still had my, my mortgage payment, at that time, owner finance payment, but it's a mortgage payment in essence. You treat it the same way. And I got roommates, and I just got one to start with. And I included like all utilities for this room. We shared the house, and that one payment paid for my monthly mortgage in the owner finance world. So in essence, I had no mortgage. I just had to pay utilities. And when I had 2 roommates, I was getting further ahead. So you see how that works, right? I had to put up with the nuisance of living with people in this home. But in exchange for that, I pretty much I got rid of rent that way. And then I had more money that I could put aside to do things with. The other thing about this home is it was in the wrong part of town. That's part of why it was at that price point, right? And it's something that I ended up remodeling. So in my first week, the hot water heater broke. And I was not even there. And I get this call like, water heater's broken. I have a trail of like towels in the basement leading the water to the drain, and it's just spewing out water. And I was like, so there's this valve right there that you can turn off, and that'll stop, and I'll be home. And I got home, and my friend who I bought the house from said, I'm going to buy you a housewarming gift. Hop in my truck. And I hopped in his truck because I was like, oh no, what do I do? Like I just had gotten like all the money I could together to owner finance this thing. And we go to Home Depot, and he spent $200 on a water heater for me, drove back to the house, and showed me how to install a water heater. So the gift of the water heater was very helpful. But the real gift he gave me was he taught me a fearlessness about repairing things. And that house, I did a lot of repairs on that house over the years that I had it. And including drywall work, which is why I was able to hang a drywall, like hang the ceiling in my rental this last week. It was because he did that. And I realized you can do plumbing, you can do electrical, you can do all these things, Nicole. You just have to know how to do them. Like I bought books because this was the early 2000s. Like you bought books, right? And it made a huge difference in all of my approaching of rentals. So fast forward to 2006. I still just had that one house and a dream and a salary that wasn't great. Yeah, it was a wonderful gift. Somebody in the comments is like, that's a wonderful gift. I'm like, yes, the skills were more important. And he's always helped me with stuff. So fast forward to 2006, I moved to Tennessee and I bought a house here because by that time my salary had gone up a bit. And then I had years of rental income from my roommates because I always executed rental agreements with my roommates just the same way I would as if I didn't live there. So it was very clear what we had. And I filed taxes with rental income. So then that played into my ability to finance my first house in Tennessee, which I just bought the traditional way and moved into it. And guess what? The first thing I did in my mid 30s in Nashville, Tennessee. Guess what I did? Well, I was in a 4-bedroom home at that point, 2 bathrooms, and I got roommates. You know why I got roommates? Because it brings the costs down. And I didn't have kids at that point, so I didn't need all those bedrooms. So why not have roommates? So mid-30s, still have roommates. And then I started looking at the real estate market in Nashville. And at that time, it was looking a lot like Portland did when I bought the house in Portland, which appreciated in value because it turned out that house I got in Portland was in a neighborhood that ended up being one of the coolest neighborhoods in Portland over the next 10 years. So that was just lucky. That was awesome. But I still had the house in Portland as a standalone rental at that point because I had moved very suddenly to Tennessee. I had my house, I had roommates, and I'm looking around going, what can I do? And the person I bought that house from was like, we could go in on a place. And he went in with me on a duplex in Nashville in a rather undervalued part of town. In fact, I would say the part of town it is in is still slightly undervalued. It's not as over bloated as I would say other places in Nashville were. And the place I found needed work, but we managed to buy it together and we just financed it together with a mortgage and a down payment, right? And I found somebody to help me with property management on that and repairs who I trusted. So, and the reason I trusted this person is he had done a lot of work for me on my own house in Nashville and other places. So it took me a few years to get this done. But when I first got the duplex, it was empty. And so I went into one side and I cleaned it all up. It wasn't like trashed or anything. It was just, it needed, cleaning. I took some chocolate chip cookie dough and I baked cookies and I had an open house and I had people come look at it. I put them through the same screening process I did in Portland. All of it. Started my first, rental arrangement, ended up renting the other side too. And here's where the bad experiences started. I started making exceptions to my policy when people asked me to sometimes. So I let people in recovering from former evictions with an extra deposit. I just established that as a policy. I let in people with criminal background history with an extra deposit. I let folks in with bad credit with an extra deposit. And I didn't come by the apartment monthly to check and make sure everything was okay. And what resulted from that, in 100% of 100% of the time that I ever made an exception to any of my screening policies, 100%, guys, is I had issues where either rent didn't get paid or people with addiction problems let other people into the apartment and it turned into a source of, let's just say, illicit things in the neighborhood. And then I had to clean it up. And so a couple of times, I wouldn't really know there was a problem until rent was late. And then when rent was late, it would take me another month to realize rent was late. This is where I got to that point where if you're late for rent, you just get a notice immediately. And I had to go through full eviction process for the first time ever. And I started by sending notice. And like in the past, if I had ever sent notice because there was a problem and it was like, by this day, you have to be out 30 days from now, people just left. Not in my Nashville duplex. They didn't. They stayed. And then it's like, yeah, so now what are you going to do, lady? So what I did when "now what are you going to do, lady" happened was I went straight to a lawyer. And this is one where I could have, as a landlord, gone to the courts and filed. But at that point, I decided I have screwed up so badly that I am going to just pay a lawyer to do it right, so we do not screw up anymore. And I paid the lawyer, and it took 45 days from the time that I did that to get the person kicked out by the sheriff, because this person was not going to leave. They knew what the laws were. They knew I'd made an exception to my policies, and they were just taking me for everything they could. And on the way out, this is how destructive this person was. They like cut the cord of the fridge to the power so you couldn't plug it back in with food in it. They left food in the oven to rot. They clogged up the sink in the bathroom and turned on the water and just left it on. They put holes in walls. They ripped fixtures out of ceilings. Like, they did a lot of damage. And that was the day. That was the incident. Like, I had these other ones where we had some things. It was like I lost a month or two of rent and they left it dirty. This one like actively vandalized the inside of the apartment to the tune of I had to rebuild a whole bathroom because of the water just pouring through. So, from that point forward, I sat down with the lawyer and I'm like, what do I need to do? And he's like, here's a new rental agreement. You need to do all of these things, standard, and don't let anybody, just don't do exceptions anymore. And that was a very good arrangement with that lawyer. I've had him do one other eviction for me, and it was during COVID shutdowns. I had somebody pull a gun on somebody else. And then the courts were closed and you couldn't do anything about it. And it's a duplex and there's somebody else who lives next door and they're like not feeling like, just imagine what that's like. So I told that story on the podcast too, but that person eventually left. Everybody in the comments are asking about small claims and other things. People are like, did you go after them for more? Here's the thing. I could go after people for more and it costs money to do that. I did get evictions on their report. So if a future landlord calls me, I can say certain things on the phone. But what I have never done is gone collections after people. That's not true. But mostly I don't do that. Well, so it's sort of an equation. Like if the person has no job and no money and they just went back to prison, that happened once. What am I going to do? Go after them for their prison stipend? It was more effort to do that than to move on. What has happened since that time is I'm super picky about tenants, and I have specific criteria for tenants so that we don't end up there again, usually, hopefully ever again. So during this whole time though, so that was like 16 years ago, I bought the duplex with my buddy. And so at that point, I had a Portland rental, I had a Nashville rental home, and I had this duplex, and then I bought the hauler. So what happens with real estate is once you have some with some equity in it, you can leverage that to buy others. And that's sort of how I went from $25,000 to the first property. It had equity. I could leverage that for another one because that house in Portland tripled in value. And then I just kept leveraging the equity. And I ended up at a point where had everybody left all my rental units at once, I actually would have lost them. Luckily, that never happened. And I started thinking about that pretty carefully and meeting with lawyers on how I could restructure how things were to protect different assets. So that's the other thing I would say is once you get past one or two rentals, it's time to think about how do you structure that. And the best way to do that for your local area is to find a lawyer to work with who can help you figure that out. And, somebody that you could potentially pay to look at all of your finances would be agristaxadvice.com, since that person has some experience in the real estate and rental markets. Just saying. Anyway, so I bought the Holler homestead, and I lived in the Holler homestead without a roommate for the first time in my life in my 40s, guys. In my 40s. I mean, I guess I moved here in my 30s, but like I had roommates most of my adult life. And when I moved to the Holler, it was like the new dawn had come. I had, I went through some bad experiences with that duplex in Nashville. I had a whole system in place. I had lawyers. I had carpenters. I had all these things. I had much more standardized policies and no exception screening rules. And I have some questions started. So I saw you guys ask questions about screenings. We'll catch those at the end. Standardized paint colors, no ceiling fans, no garbage disposals. And here's how I did the appliances thing. So here's a trick. If you don't want to pay for the repair of an appliance, but it really helps to have the washer and dryer hooked up to the washer dryer hookups, here's what you can do. Say, technically, the washer and dryer don't come with the apartment, but I'm willing to give it to you. And you write a thing saying this, you now own it. If you want to sell it back to me at the end, you can. They actually make more money that way, but you don't have to change out washers and dryers. And I don't like changing out washers and dryers. Washers in particular are heavy. So that's a way you can sort of include that thing or have a value add without having to be on the hook for maintaining it. Figured that trick out, and that works really well in my duplex where there are washer dryer hookups, and I actually need to see that. I definitely like immediate eviction notices for late rent. I mean, there's a grace period that is just, it's in the contract, but once you're outside of that, man, I start the paperwork immediately. I never put it off. I never understanding about that. The one thing I am willing to do is waive the late fee once a year, but I'm still filing the eviction notices. And in Tennessee, the process is you send notice that you're late on rent, and it's notice to vacate or make it right. And then once the first of the month comes around again, that's when you actually file with the courts. So because they have this like whole first of the month thing that happens. This is different in every state. You need to know your state. I'm just going to say that. So rent is due on the 1st. You don't get it till the 4th. I think you have till the 4th to pay. If I don't get it by the 4th, notice goes out saying you need to leave or pay. And then on the 1st, we will file for the actual eviction, and then you have a court date set, which can be 15 to 30 days from there. And then once the court hearing happens, they give a warrant to the sheriff. And then once you do that, you have to pay the sheriff to come out and evict the person, like kick the person out. And when they do that, you need to have a crew on site to move all the stuff out of the apartment. And you just put it outside. Like you've seen this happen. People just put all the stuff outside the apartment. And then the person who has been evicted has a reasonable amount of time to move that stuff off the front lawn, basically to wherever they're going next. And I asked the sheriff, how long is reasonable? And he said, about 48 hours. So then once the 48 hours happened, and that's something I would ask every time, by the way. And some states will stipulate how long it is. Some states require that you put it in storage for 30 days, by the way. Once that time is gone, then you can take it to the dump or sell it or do anything you want with it. So it's actually a pretty sad thing when you need to go through an eviction process with somebody. And I've only had to go that far once. Like I literally, up until the sheriff came, the person was vandalizing the apartment and staying it. And the day the sheriff came and opened the door, the guy just walked off, walked down the street, and never saw him again. Left all his stuff behind. And it was just sort of one of those, it was an inevitable thing for him that was going to happen. And he was taking as much, flesh on the way out as he could. So I am telling you that whole process, and it would probably vary. It will vary, I'm sure, in every state. I'm telling you how that process goes here. Because if you don't have the capacity to emotionally go through that, because it's an emotional process, you should really consider if you want rentals in your world. Really, really consider it. And then there are parts of the country where you should not have rentals. Portland, Oregon is one of them. They have they've changed the equation between landlord and tenant rights so much towards the tenant that it's out of balance. And what you'll find is in many places it's out of balance towards the landlord, and in many places it's out of balance towards the tenant. And you want to find somewhere that's balanced, that doesn't look like you're going to get completely screwed, because you wouldn't want to do business in that way, right? So you want to know what the situation is. So big picture, I went into rentals with a financial goal per property that I ultimately want 10 rental properties. If like in a perfect world, I'll have at least 10, because with that sets me up for a sort of a retirement rental business. And that includes hiring an actual property management company, because I haven't talked about that yet. We will talk about that. I manage my own properties, which takes more time than if you outsource it. But the thing for me to look at before I'm willing to take on a rental is, do I get positive cash flow now when I buy it? So that means when I buy the duplex and I rent the duplex with a reasonable vacancy rate, because sometimes it's vacant, do I make more money at the end of the year than I pay out? If the answer to that is yes, and that amount of money is enough, then I will consider buying the duplex or a house, right? I've gone to a lot more single family homes now as a strategy. Like, the cool thing about a duplex is if one side's empty, you're still paying stuff with the other side on rent. But the less cool thing is you have an extra layer of people and relationship management, because you need your tenants to get along. So I'm kind of a fan of the single family home rental. We'll see if I change my mind over time over that. So it has to have positive cash flow, and I'm not going for a long-term asset appreciation approach. If it appreciates, great. Like my Portland home, because it just happened to be in a neighborhood and I got lucky and it went up. I was able to leverage that into multiple properties when it sold, right? So, because that helped. So part of me expanding out here was that I was able to leverage money from that. And I ended up with a lot in another state. I ended up with a couple of properties here. So it sort of it expanded my reach. I ended up with another property I haven't even talked to you guys about that I have now sold on contract, and I get a payment for that every month because I hold the mortgage for that. And that one, when it's paid off, it's paid off. But that property and these rentals are part of how I did make it when I transitioned out of my job. It helped to have some rental income during that time. And I actually took money rather than put it all back into the rental property. Because the other thing I've done, so it has positive cash flow, but a property with positive cash flow does not mean it's paying me every month. It means it's going into a pot to leverage against the next property as part of the expansion time. So let's talk about property managers, because one thing you can do is buy rentals and hire property management. And I see somebody in the comments saying, I'm not a fan of rental management companies. Most I've dealt with were always just bad people and I've never been evicted or anything. Right. So property managers, there are good ones and bad ones. And there's a lot of things to look out for if you're going to use a property manager. And I've not learned this the hard way. I worked with one property manager one time in Nashville to market only my duplex. So I did not have to drive back and forth to Nashville to show it. And she did a good job. She found me a good tenant. They stayed for 2 years. They mostly didn't damage the place. There's always a little wear and tear, guys, so you like do not have overly high expectations on that. There's going to be wear and tear. And if you think about it, that's reasonable. You get wear and tear in your house too. You just repaint stuff and whatever. So she probably would have been good as a monthly maintenance manager too, but I didn't want to pay the money for that. I'd like to be the monthly maintenance manager and keep that money. I also have watched my friend who I own the duplex with, who has multiple rentals in multiple markets, work with property management companies. And the first time he worked with one, extensive meetings, really drilled down, checked the references, all of it, gets into the arrangement and finds out that to repair a leak under his sink, which if you've ever fixed a leak under a sink, it can be aggravating, but basically there's not a lot of parts and you can replace all of the parts and usually that'll fix the leak, like in a pinch, and that will take you 45 minutes. And the parts that go under a sink are generally standardized, and this particular sink was standardized. So it wasn't like something weird. So there was a leak in the drain parts under the sink and he needed to replace one of the little plastic pieces under there. $550 is what he was charged for that. Because every time the plumber came out, there was a fee for that, and then there was a property management fee. And then there was the hourly fee while the plumber was there, and every time the plumber left to get another part, I forgot that, he was recharged the property management fee. So, basically a $13 part and 20-minute job turned into a $550 fee. And that happened for a couple of things there before he realized what was going on, because he saw the statement. And here's what was going on there, guys. The property management company shouldn't have been doing this. Had arrangements with the contractors where they got kickbacks if they could boost up the bills, because the property management company also got a fee every time that plumber came out. And that's just seedy and wrong. So if you do have a property management company, you need to be pretty cognizant of what they're doing. And the other thing you need to do, because the other problem I've had is the property management repair team doesn't do a good job repairing. So you need to go check the work until you have a good company. Now, since that time, my friend who I own the duplex with has gotten into arrangements with property managers that are good. And he did this by going out physically to the location, which is not where he lives, living in his rental while fixing it up, getting to know real estate agents and other people until he found a good reputable company, and then he tested them on one property and then he checked on them. And over time, it has turned out that that particular relationship worked really well. Checking references of the property management company, I wish I could say it worked, but they're going to give you the references that are going to give good references, right? So never go into that arrangement without fully expecting you are checking up on it on a regular basis. Like and the other thing is, if you live close enough to your rental to check it monthly, here's something you can do. If you have HVAC, there is an air filter. You can change the air filter once a month. It does something really good for you if you do this. Your furnace at that location is better maintained. 2, you walk in the house, you pull the thing off, you put the filter on. You do this at a prearranged time with your tenant. You walk back out of the house, tell them to have a nice night. And you just had eyes on the inside of that place, and you have an idea if you're worried about anything at that point. Because if a tenant has a problem brewing, it will show when you come to put that filter in. If you go and mow the lawn once in a while, guess what? You can see signs of distress. And sometimes, guys, signs of distress are like, hey, I noticed the garbage is piling up. Is there a problem? And you find out, this happened to my dad in one of his rentals. You find out the person got hurt, broke their leg, and couldn't take the garbage off and doesn't know what to do. And then you work with them on a solution to take the garbage off. And then you don't have garbage piling up for 6 more months while they recover from their broken leg. Like, literally, the guy was like, I know it's a mess. I found somebody finally to hire to do this. If it's not done by next week, I need you to help me and I will pay. Like, that's what happened with my dad. And he would have never known that was going on had he not been there doing some other maintenance thing. So it's really key to do maintenance. Something else I learned recently, I came to this, it's actually because I met Ryan Steva from Clarion Home Inspections. He's also the homesteadconsultant.com guy. He does house inspections too. And I realized that because I will go inspect the house once a year and look like under the sink for leaks and all of that. If I send Ryan and pay him, he finds more things wrong than I do. When Ryan finds things wrong, it's like a punch list of maintenance that I can address before it turns into a big problem. And so having that annual screening of the duplex in particular, because it's kind of far from my house, it's an hour and a half or so for me to get from here to there. That helps me, and it makes my tenants happier because they don't have this like brewing problem that ticks them off that I'm not paying attention to, that I didn't know was going on. Because this is the other thing about renters, is they're not going to tell you when stuff's leaking or broken. Or they're going to tell you about every little thing, including light bulbs that went out. Like there's, most tenants don't know. I actually kind of need to know that the toilet was flushing slowly before it's just not flushing at all. Or I needed to know the furnace was making that weird noise, and now you don't have a furnace. But if I would have known it was making that weird noise, so there's stuff that if you've never owned a house as a tenant, you don't necessarily realize it's an early warning sign, or maybe you think it's a pain in my neck to hear the things going on. It's not necessarily that. It's like, actually, I kind of wanted to know that the light switch was sparking every time you turned it on, and now we just burned the house down. It's an extreme example, but actually my dad did have a fire in one of his places once that super lucky the tenant was home and saw it, and it only affected 2 of the 4 units in that place. But it was due to faulty wiring in an HVAC installation that somebody else did. So having that annual inspection is a big deal. And it's something I would have never thought of because, you're trying to keep costs down, but actually paying the money for somebody else to do it, really good idea. So at this point, I rarely have issues with my rentals. Like one of my tenants last weekend told me that the outdoor spigots are leaking. And it's like, hey, can we fix this? And I was like, oh, sweet. Yeah. They showed me. I was like, yeah, we need to fix that. So those are going to I think we're replacing the spigots at this point. I was just going to change out the washer in it, but then Tactical told me, no, let's just put better spigots in. And I was like, great idea. We rarely have issues at any of our rentals. And we do use the time between tenancy to implement bigger maintenance issues. So you've heard me talk about what I'm working on in Nashville right now as I replace the drywall on the ceiling. Has nothing to do with tenants that I'm doing that. It's because the house had settled and I jacked the house back up and it cracked all the drywall, and then some of it started looking really loose and I was afraid it was going to fall. And so I decided tenants are gone. There's nothing in the apartment. Let's replace that drywall, which was going to fall down someday, before it falls down on somebody's TV or whatever, or on somebody's head and cracks them in the head. So I actually took it into one more room than I technically had to, just so it would all look the same, but in between tenants is when you do things like that, because if you end up having to fix something like that while a tenant's there, you got to go pay for him to live somewhere else if it's something that major. Like one time I helped my buddy through needing to remodel a bathroom, which took 2 weeks. And what he worked out with them is he bought them memberships at the local Y so they could shower. And he had a porta potty brought out so they could, use the bathroom. But it was the only bathroom in the place. And so it wasn't like, well, use your other bathroom and we'll get this fixed, right? So really big projects you want to do between tenants. And the approach to is and boy, Nicole just stuttered. Where'd that come from? Anyway, the approach of keeping it empty longer and paying the mortgage longer rather than just rent to whoever comes along because you're worried about cash flow, that comes when you have leveraged your rentals so that you're not super close to the line. So part of why I want to have a property that's positive cash flow is I use that positive cash flow to save up money in an account that's dedicated to that rental. Okay? And then if the HVAC breaks and I got to spend $5,500 on a new furnace, I didn't take that as income. So it just comes from that account and pays for the repair. No problem. Also, when I end up in a situation where I haven't found the right renter, I'm not like paying the mortgage out of my pocket in addition to my house payment here. And that then makes it easier to stay calm and not compromise. So I think the biggest thing is be ready for that. Like realize that you're not going to have it rented 12 months out of the year every year. Big things are going to break and you're going to need to fix them. Like I'm literally buying a roof in Nashville in the next 2 years. I'm sure of it. And that's going to cost thousands of dollars. And, you know, in the old days before I figured out the positive cash flow thing, I might have had to take that out of pocket. And there are always improvements you can do on each property. And every time you update something, it looks better, it's a better rental, and it's a better, later sale. So just think about that as well. So speaking of finances, for the better part of 20 years, most of the money I have brought in on these rentals has either gone back into those rentals in the form of improvements, even though it's positive cash flow, right? It's no longer positive cash flow when you do improvements. And most of my rentals are nicer than my own house right now because I've done the improvements there and I haven't taken money for here. And I've done this by choice because to build things long-term into an ongoing revenue stream, I felt it was important, kind of like when you build your own business, you just reinvest everything into it that you can, to do that with the rental business while I'm still young enough to do hard work on the rental business. There have been properties where I have started to take a monthly amount out of it based on the financial situation. And that ebbs and flows based on when there are large repairs, like a furnace is my biggest example. So one of my rules of thumb is there is enough money in every rental account to replace the HVAC system. And so when I start a new project, like I just started a new property in the last few years that I got. And the first thing we did was get it ready to rent. And the second thing we did was rent it. And now the account is finally 2 years later up to where if the furnace breaks, the furnace can be replaced. So that's my first goal in that property. Now, once that happens, we can decide, and it's another property I own with somebody. So we can decide, does a monthly stipend come out or does it go towards an improvement? Or does it go towards another property, right? But the first thing you do is you get the HVAC covered because that's going to break. Like, it's going to break and have to be replaced. And like in the property I'm thinking of, within the next 5 years, if I don't have to replace the entire HVAC system, I'm going to be super shocked because I know the age of the HVAC system. And in my Nashville property, I had to replace both in a year because they were put in the same year, right? So that's just something to think about, just as a process, is to have understand that it's not just all the maintenance stuff and paying for, property taxes and the insurance and all that. It's also like something big's going to break, figure out what that thing is, make sure you have that covered first before you start taking money off it. Because if you don't, and you do it the other way, if something big happens, you're paying for that out of pocket. So, okay, let's go on to questions here. Question, did you do backgrounds? Okay, so I've done background checks on everybody I've ever rented to. And at this point, I like to use apartments.com to do the criminal and credit screening. I personally verify employment and check references. They do an eviction screening too, so you can see if somebody's ever been evicted. And then and I say this all up front, like it runs the whole report. I say what I'm screening for, what the income requirements are, all of that. And it's amazing to me how many people apply who don't pass for very big reasons. Now, when I get somebody who doesn't pass, I call them and say, this came up on the report. And I've had it happen one time that what came up on the report was not theirs. and it was somebody else with their name, and it was very clearly a different driver's license number than their driver's license number. When we like drilled, they're like, no, that's not me. So just know that that can happen. Like, don't just discount people out of hand. But yeah, it's very important to use a third party for that, I think. And because, like, how am I going to do a background check, right? And it's also important to think about what things do you want to cover. Now, something I learned from using the property manager last time is before she let people into my apartment to look at it. So she had it set up so you can self-tour the apartment without somebody showing you. You enter a key code that's only good for a 15-minute window. You look at the apartment, and then if you want it, they go from there. And what she would do is, I think they were required to have their application fee in already, but that might not be true. And they did the employment verification and income verification before they ever came out there. So they didn't run the application. The person went and looked at it, and they also had the deposit on hand too. So if they said they wanted it, then they were going to lose the deposit if they chose not to, or if, and then they'd run the application, right? And she had the application fee already for that when they were like, oh yeah, we want it, ran the application fee, already had the deposit. If they passed the application fee, deposited the deposit, and then executed the contract. And at that point they walked away from the contract, they would lose their deposit. So, but all of that was very clearly laid out before they started. And they didn't lose their deposit until they said, oh, I want the place. Oh, never mind, I don't want the place, sort of thing. So I'm actually going to be talking to a lawyer right now because I'm a little on the fence about how I'm going to rent out this apartment next. So I have it listed for rent right now. Nobody's really popped up who's been a hot lead. So what I get mostly on Facebook is it available? And no answer. Is it available? No answer. Is it available? How much is the rent? And when I have an interaction like that on Facebook, that tells me the person didn't read the ad. And my first screening criteria is you've got to know what you're looking at. And like, you literally on Facebook can just click and go back and look at the ad. So when it's somebody behaving like that, in fact, if you ask me, is it available on Facebook, I don't answer you. If you actually bother to say something to me that you actually typed out, that's when I answer you. And I'm getting better leads through Zillow right now, just for the record. When you own it with someone, do you split income cost 50-50 or is it another arrangement? So you can set this up however you want to. And this is from Justin at 30 Day Reviews. You can set it up however you want it. So if like you own 75% of the property and they own 25, then you'd split it 75-25. When I own it 50-50, then we split 50-50. And on taxes for income, let's say your rental income is $1,000 for the year, because that's an easy number. 500 of that goes to my taxes as income. 500 goes to his taxes as income. And then expenses are also split 50-50 that way. If you run it as an LLC, then you do the business first, and then that flows out however you have your LLC arranged to the people. And I've never done it as an S Corp, so I don't know. So there's lots of different ways. When you get to this point in the rental business, you really need to think about how you're structured with some advice, some legal counsel, or it just doesn't work. It looks like Odyssey just went down. Sorry, Odyssey. We are removing you. So Odyssey didn't like me today. Okay, next question is, do you charge an application fee? Yes, because applications cost me money, so I charge an application fee. And I used to not charge an application fee and just pay it, and then people would just apply, pass, and then not take the place because it was no risk to them. In some cases, and I don't do this anymore, I used to go application fee goes towards your deposit. I am in the process of reevaluating all of my policies right now with advice of a lawyer. And what I think I want to do is have a higher application fee because it takes my time for screening too, but then have it turn into a deposit with a 6-month or 12-month lease. So I may go back that direction. And then if they apply and decide, never mind, which happens a surprising number of times, then then I've been paid for my time to screen somebody, because it takes, it takes a few hours by the time you make all the calls and they call you back, and you have to call again if they don't call you back. Like, there's a lot of things that applications take. So anyway, we're getting towards the end. Are there any other questions? You should get them in now, or else you're going to have to email me your questions. That's basically the story of how I went from a relatively low income to having a rental business that, while it's not as far along as I wish it was, I have a duplex and 2 other properties, which to me is 4 properties. So the duplex counts as 2. I want to have 10. Like, the money works at 10. Part of why I don't have more is that for about a decade, I stopped focusing on leveraging it in to more. Okay. And that's my fault. That's all me. That was me trying to build something else, not doing the thing I had originally set out. And had I stayed focused during that decade, I'd probably have 6 or 8 right now. So we'll see what the next 10 years bring. In general, I am pretty happy with the rental world. I've been upset over the years on and off based on things that happen, and it's been a pain in my neck. And believe me, for the last 2 weeks, I didn't want to spend every free moment at my duplex hanging drywall. Like, that wasn't a thing I love to do. But in exchange for that, over time, that duplex is an important part of my building local ongoing revenue, Operation Independence. It's like a huge part of it. And if you think about it, I have 4 rentals now. And I also have a redneck in my guest house, renting my guest house on this property. So I still live with roommates, guys. And I'm in my 50s. And it still works. It's still really helpful financially to do that. Like, I don't have somebody in my actual house anymore. But in a lot of ways, I'm trying to leverage the value here. We've even thought about putting a tiny cabin out here and renting that out, right? Just to have one more way to make income. And I kind of jest with that. Like, I have a roommate, though. Like, we eat dinner together all the time. And I also have a partner in the homestead, so that's kind of helpful. But I do think one of the best ways to help yourself financially and quickly improve your situation if you're living alone, and some of you are roommates, so you're like, nah, I can't do that, Nicole, is to consider, is there a space for a roommate here? And how does that change my financial picture? Because if you add a roommate, it's kind of like getting a raise. If you add a roommate and you become dependent on that money rather than put that money aside towards your future prosperity, then you've done nothing. But if you add a roommate and you put that and use it to move yourself forward, then you've done something. Then you've set up a situation where you have more success in the future. And with this business in particular, once you have one property, it's easier to get the second property, and it's easier to get the third property. Once you can prove income, it's less of a it's a no-brainer to lend you money, if it, especially if you've built equity in some of your properties. So there's a lot of ways that you can go from one property to 2. A home equity line of credit on the first one can get you that second one sometimes. You have to decide if that makes sense at today's interest rates, but it used to make sense. I'm hesitating at today's interest rates, but that's okay. I've also looked at some markets outside of my area where you can still buy a house for $30,000 or $40,000, and then it's a rental. They're not great houses. They're not in the best part of town, but if you can make positive cash flow off something like that, like $40,000 starts to sound achievable. You can't get a mortgage on that because most mortgage lenders won't lend that low. That's the problem there. So then you're looking at a personal loan. And that's another way you can do it, is get a personal loan. So there are so many ways. And I've heard about a lot of bad experiences of buying like owner contract. got to be really careful with that in both directions. Like if you're buying owner finance and you miss a payment, they may have a stipulation that if you miss one payment, you lose it. Like read the contract carefully. Get a lawyer involved in that if you're going to do it and be like, should I sign this? If not, what should I sign? And believe me, the biggest bummer conversations you're ever going to have is when you ask a lawyer, should I sign this? Because they're going to tell you no, and they're going to have lots of reasons why. But it is worth having that conversation, even if you ignore some of their advice, right? Every lawyer listening to this is like, don't ignore our advice, Nicole. But it's worth doing, even if you're at a point where you don't feel like you can quote unquote afford the lawyer. Lawyers can cost a lot, but it's surprisingly a lot less expensive to pay a lawyer for something like this than to pay the piper on the other side of it by putting tens of thousands of dollars into a piece of land that you then lose. I know somebody who almost lost one that way. The other thing is, as the person holding the land contract, if you set yourself up in a situation where a mortgage can be got on that contract and you are second in line, if they then become a deadbeat and don't pay it and go into bankruptcy and whatever, you're second in line to get paid. You will probably not get paid at all. And I've seen this happen to two people. One was my dad, where he was locked up in a legal battle for 5 or 6 years over a property where this happened. And another person I know sold the property, agreed to hold a note. They got a mortgage on it in front of him, so he signed for that too. And when that person became unable to pay for the property and that property got resold, he got $0. So he basically sold the property for nothing on contract, something he owned outright. I believe he got some money at the beginning, but nowhere near what it was worth. And that was because he agreed to that. So this is where having your real estate lawyer is worth the money. When I sold my property on contract, I did it through the title company I use here, and I used their lawyer. And I set it up at a reasonable interest rate for the person, because I wasn't looking to get like 20% interest or something absurd. And for a relatively short term, about 8 years. And they had a sizable down payment. They had like a 50% down payment. So this was a fairly low risking. And then I looked at that and I thought, it took me a month to figure this out. It's like, I could split the property because there was a house and land. I could split the property. The house wasn't worth anything, guys. They can have the house for their down payment. I'll sell the land on contract because there's not a lot you can do to damage the land. I mean, you could log it, I guess, but like there's not a lot you're going to do besides leave garbage on it to damage the land. That'll be a no down payment on contract thing. They will have their name on the title of the house, which means if they fix up the house, they can leverage that into a loan to pay me off on the land. And if they don't, then I'm not stuck with a house that's more trashed than that house already was. And their name does not go on the title to that land until they pay me off. So there's an automatic thing that happens at the end of them paying me off where the title goes from my name to their name. I did that through the title company. It's all recorded. It's in a contract that you basically have to execute. If they don't pay me, then my name's on the title and I can evict them from the land, like through the normal eviction channels if I have to. So that's how I set that up. And I, again, did that with advice of a lawyer. And this person has paid on time every single time. Like they've been great. And, and that's where I mean, like, there's lots of different ways to do things. And that one, I usually wouldn't have taken a land contract, but it would have been really hard to finance that house in a traditional way based on the state it was in when it was purchased. It's looking a lot better these days. Anyway, I hope you liked the show. If you did and you want to support the work I'm doing here, you can do it in 2 ways. 1, get your coffee at hollowroast.com. 2, consider becoming a member. Head over to livingfreeintennessee.com to find out more. With that, guys, go out, make it a great week.